what are the chances of a peace deal between Israel and Hamas being reached in the coming weeks in light of the release of Idan Alexander, the last American citizenship holder by Hamas?
Thank you for having me, Hani. It seems we are witnessing a very significant breakthrough with regards to the war in Gaza. And of course, the breakthrough is not that some detainee is being released. This is not something new. However, the breakthrough is that this release has materialized after a direct bilateral agreement between Hamas and the United States. That's the first time the United States and Hamas have conducted a successful negotiation without the involvement even of the mediators, and that also excluded Israel entirely. So it seems that Hamas has offered Trump a gesture of goodwill before his tour in the region, in the Middle East. And it seems that the United States will reciprocate by pressuring Israel to allow more humanitarian aid into the Gaza Strip, and even possibly proposing some sort of framework to reach a long-term ceasefire and a wider detainee exchange agreement. However, I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that would say that the end of the war is imminent, or that a comprehensive ceasefire agreement or settlement is imminent, as some would suggest. As far from it. So far, we have not seen the United States actually exercise the maximum amount of pressure needed to push Israel to engage in actual de-escalation schemes. So far, if anything, the United States did not even abandon its proposal for the Gaza settlement, which entailed the so-called voluntary relocation of Palestinians, which is basically ethnic cleansing and an act of forced displacement. So we haven't seen that so far yet. The release of Idan Alexander today, and the agreement that has been reached between the United States and Hamas is indicative that we are in a better place than we were a few days ago. We are closer, definitely, even if we are still far away, but we are definitely closer to a peaceful settlement than we were yesterday. And it's also indicative of a U.S. readiness to impose some sort of pressure on Israel in order to make them more lenient and more flexible with regards to their negotiating position, which has been very stringent over the past few weeks and has obstructed any meaningful efforts by the mediators, Egypt, Qatar, and the United States, to a lesser extent, of course, to reach a sustainable settlement in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Dr. Osman, Hamas's decision to release the American detainee from Gaza without any conditions was largely credited to the mediation efforts by Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. Now, what sort of pressure or influence were countries such as Egypt, Qatar, and the U.S. able to sway Hamas to decide on to make such a decision without any conditions?
It seems that Egypt and Qatar have communicated to Hamas the true situation on the ground, and of course, with regards to the position of the United States, I think that the mediators, I'm only speculating here, that explained to Hamas the mindset of President Trump and how to deal with him. President Trump is not someone you would try to play a game of arm twisting with during a negotiation. He is someone who understands goodwill gestures and overtures, which he will be more than willing to reciprocate if it is granted to him. So I think this was a pivotal role played by the mediators to explain to Hamas that they have to be more flexible and realistic, and their conditions and demands should correspond to the realities on the ground in the battlefield. And not to speak as if they are the victors and that they are have triumphed and that they are in control of things, or that things are going in their favor, because they aren't, because they are not in control. because of Gaza is in shambles and the people are being exterminated and starved to death and bombed into oblivion. So this is hardly a successful result or something that you might call a triumph. And I think Hamas now is becoming way more level-headed, way more realistic in their correspondence, and even way more mature than the Israelis are. And I think this will be a tactical win for the Palestinian resistance on the short term that should be capitalized upon by the Palestinians and by the Arabs in order to push for a more comprehensive settlement in Gaza.
So, do you think that with the release of Ivan Alexander, it could be followed by the release of the rest of the detainees by Hamas and shift U.S. policy towards a more aggressive push for ceasefire negotiations? Or are we being too optimistic and hopeful, or could this actually happen?
I think we are being extremely optimistic, or way too optimistic, but this exaggerated optimism does have some grounds. Because, of course, we cannot predict what measures President Trump might take, but all we know is that the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Netanyahu is strained. To what extent is this fallout between them? How deep is it? To what extent it will be effective? Of course, that cannot be measured or assessed at the moment. However, there is a condition where there is tension between the two principal allies. And the United States, of course, has the upper hand. So we can assume that there is a distinct possibility that they might adopt a much more aggressive stance with regards to trying to push Israel to be more flexible.
Dr. Osman.
To be more flexible. However, if they fail, if the Israelis decide to be more stringent, they might face the consequences of the lack of flexibility by diminished American support. However, I would never imagine a scenario where the United States and Israel will undergo a process of divorce. I don't think that's applicable. I think that the United States will always have Israel's back. However, they might apply more pressure in order to try to reach a ceasefire and a long-term ceasefire. And what indicates that is what Steve Witkoff said. Steve Witkoff said that we are very interested in a long-term ceasefire, 70 days long, I think. That was the proposal in exchange for the release of 10 Israeli detainees and, of course, the launching of serious negotiations for a more sustained ceasefire and the release of all the detainees. And he said that we cannot achieve that because Israel wants to continue the war. So he laid the blame for the first time on Israel. So we might see pressure. However, we can only wait and see, Hani, whether this will actually materialize on the ground as meaningful pressure or just lip service to give the illusion to his Arab host that he is doing something before he visits the region, especially that he will garner a lot of money from this visit.
Yes. Well, as you've mentioned, it is coinciding with his visit to the Gulf. So is it possible for Trump to announce a final ceasefire in Gaza from the Gulf, which would actually bode well with the GCC countries and might be in favor of more economic deals taking place?
I think if he already had convinced Israel to adhere to a ceasefire, he might announce that, but that does not seem to be the case. What I expect is that he will present a comprehensive vision for the settlement in Gaza that will be more reasonable than his previous propositions. His previous propositions were borderline mad. Now he might present something that is more reasonable. It might not meet the standard of the Egyptian mediators or the Arab mediators in general or the international community, especially that we already have an Egyptian Arab Islamic plan of reconstruction without displacement in place that has been endorsed by the international community. So I do not see why it should not be just endorsed by Trump. What's actually happening is that Trump and the United States refuse to adopt or accept this plan as the way forward. However, if they have something else in mind that they would have to present, anything they would present will be better than previous propositions presented by the Israelis and the Americans. So he might present something during the summit that he will pressure Israel in order to accept, and that will also make him curry favor with the Arab Gulf countries that are hosting him, namely Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and Qatar. However, I do not think that any economic investment by the Gulf states in the United States, or any economic cooperation or economic package of investment that the Gulf will present to the United States, will never be conditioned with the situation in Gaza, because basically the relationship, the strategic relationship between the Gulf and the United States goes way beyond the Palestinian issue, unfortunately. However, of course, I do believe they do have some tools of pressure, very subtle and benign pressure, and they are applying this very soft pressure on Trump, and it seems to be yielding some results. So overall, I think we will see a positive development during Trump's Middle East tour, or at least that's what I hope.
From Cairo, that was Dr. Mohamed Osman, the